So my talk is going to be something completely different compared to yours. Yours is very technical, very deep down, very understanding. Mine is more of a hot take from a developer experience perspective. I'm new to Deno. I didn't really know anything about it, frankly, until fairly recently. And I wanted to jump in, see what it was like, see what was new, see what was better. In short, the URLs are great. That's, if you want to skip this talk, that's the take home. All right, so let's take a look. This is about me. This slide now has Yiddish in it, so it's a huge improvement. There's no Nik Frank without politics, so this is my personal campaign. I think Israel, we should quit smoking. So this will be in the slides. I'll send them out. It's also in a later slide. This is kind of my mantra for how I'm trying to do it. We'll get there. We'll get there. All right, so what are we doing in this talk? What I wanted to do was I wanted to run automation. I don't know if you call it end-to-end or testing. Automation is kind of more my focus of taking a website that I built and running it through Puppeteer. But Puppeteer, of course, runs an NPM. And this led us to a point, perhaps I can address the question to Mr. Dahl later. From the original talk about the regrets of Node, there was this idea that you didn't care about compatibility between Node and Deno. I'm kind of, this entire talk is something of a rebuke to that, respectfully, where we're saying Puppeteer is this great software, it's this great module, it does a lot of stuff with the Chrome developer protocol that I don't want to deal with, and I want to bring it in. So the first thing I did was I wanted to learn Deno. I wanted to get comfortable with it. So I built something of an automation from scratch, just straight through the protocol. I wanted to see how the WebSockets worked. I wanted to be prepared for when, in the second part of this talk, I wanted to take Puppeteer Web, which is a Browserify copy of Puppeteer Core, and I wanted to make it run in Deno. So I wanted to make it compatible. It turns out it's not hard for a human. It might be very hard for an automated process. So let's jump in. Also, the website that I chose to automate was with my students last summer. We built Sheshbesh. It has a computer player. So the real highlight here is we're going to get the same computer player to play Sheshbesh against itself using the URL imports, which is, I think, something that is unique in Deno that we haven't really seen anywhere yet before. Okay, so basics of how Puppeteer is running. We have Chrome headless or Chromium headless. We have a WebSocket protocol, and Puppeteer is in charge of everything. It gives us a promise-based API that we want to use later. Here, we're going to have to, when we get to Deno, we're going to have to replace some of the fundamentals here, the file system out of Node. We're going to have to find something for event emitters. We're going to have to find something for WebSockets. And we're going to have to make sure that they, work as if, facade style. I got a quote from Ori Bracha. Sorry, I shouldn't say, I don't want to make him too famous. Basically, why would we want to do testing in Deno? I had to think this through when I was writing the talk. What's the point? I think it's something where testing is more paradigm oriented towards something like prescriptive code. We're demanding that something is true. We're asserting. It's less concerned with the dynamic kind of nature of JavaScript. So having it available in TypeScript, I think, just psychologically fits the type of developers that are going to be writing this code better. I've certainly seen in a lot of places that types and tests are trying to accomplish the same goal. And I think Dijkstra discusses this in some of his letters, that there's program and there's proof. And then our understanding of tests and types is that they're both underneath that concept of proof. And I have a physics degree. I want to unify them. That's the only thing I ever learned how to do. So I got a laugh there. I don't need any audience. I got one laugh from a speaker. All right, so doing it myself. Our goal here, this is an idea I had a couple months ago. I want to automate a website and export GIFs because everybody loves GIFs. And If we can make GIFs, then we've accomplished something. So this is a quick review of, just a hot take on Deno, things that I had to learn. For instance, the standard out, the pipes that are coming standard IO from the process. This is something that the docs, for me, were sufficient to figure it out, except for, and we'll get to this in kind of the conclusion, but I felt like I'm not smart enough to figure things out sometimes without an example. And there were a few issues where just getting the standard error output off a Chrome process, there's no Stack Overflow for Deno yet. So it's, I suppose everyone here, our job when we go home is ask each other questions on Stack Overflow and get lots of points answering them to each other, because we're the only people who know anything. So Deno runs pretty simple. It felt like no child process without Promisify. This was ultimately the solution that let me read off of the buffer. You see it reads somewhat more object-oriented, somewhat more prescriptive. It reads, it looks like more of a test than a JavaScript program to me. That's a hot take. Take it up on Twitter. This is our process of going through and getting a socket open to Chrome. One thing that you'll notice in the middle, in the .find, I have a default value in this .find. It's kind of awkward. This is a result of having a JavaScript developer like me writing TypeScript and getting complaints from the TypeScript type checker that I haven't defined any types. Now, I'm a Larry Wall believer. I think laziness is a great virtue. So TypeScript was willing to accept default values for me. I was willing to use default values for all my type definitions, but ultimately I found myself simply moving over to JavaScript and treating Deno not as a TypeScript runtime, but as a JavaScript runtime that TypeScript developers would, if they were interested, be able to use and not be treated second class. Even though that might be a valid position, do they even count as developers? So here we're connecting to the WebSocket. That's out of Deno's core WebSocket, the Deno standard. Kind of how the standard library, I got a sense that this is something that's going to improve academic use of JavaScript. So for many, many years, nobody teaches JavaScript at university because there's no standard library, there's no standard curriculum. There's a million college courses that teach Java or Python or even Lisp or C or C++. And there's very few good JavaScript programs. So as I was going through the standard library and kind of getting a sense of it, the consistent documentation really gave me a sense that an academic scenario might be more possible for JavaScript if this is the kind of system we're building. I don't know if Deno is going to take over the world, but I hope it does. But it certainly adds something to our understanding and our ability to work, because it's making JavaScript kind of put on a suit, and grow up and be a big boy language now. We're going to have a real standard library. We're going to be able to operate with developers at all levels. So this is finishing up our code review of kind of the jump into Deno. Here, the interesting thing, this code is what's bridging the WebSocket over into a promise-based interface. So we send packets through CDP that are tagged by ID. It's pretty simple to wait for the response with the ID and send it back as a promise. What was interesting here was this is the first time I've ever used a 408. I've never seen an async iterator before in my life, except in one talk about generators. Honestly, I felt like, just from my style, I like writing more functional style code. And this, you see the screen has a lot of pink on it. It feels somewhat imperative, somewhat C++-y to write it this way. I mean, this is great. This works. And this came right out of the docs. But I was hoping eventually, and maybe this is just something homework for myself, to have examples of using the async iterators with a more, chain, like link style syntax, Perhaps that's more comfortable, and that's something that I think right now Deno is something less dynamic than JavaScript as a whole, because JavaScript, it's very Perlish. There's many ways to do that, and most of them are bad. And Deno here, I'm finding that there's kind of a best way to do things, and it's focused on that, and that's positive. But still, sometimes I would like to see more examples, and I'd like to know why I'm not making a move if I'm not making it. All right, let's chug along. I don't have a clock, so you just got to cut me off when I go too long. Happened in a job interview this morning. It just, we've had enough of you. We'll hire you if you want. So this is my page driver. So this is running through CDP. It's pretty straightforward. I use the same pattern also when I'm using Puppeteer. Here we get to see Deno.writeFile. So this was super convenient to me. Whoever wrote base64, this is something where the object-orientedness or the typiness of the language or the runtime or the library, it actually made it more comfortable. I knew what I was doing when I was working with base64 strings or uint arrays. I had problems, for instance, using Amazon serverless. In my last JSIL talk, we did an API gateway that was dealing with security on images, and those had to be base64'd in and out. And that was a horrible process. And this, I was afraid of that, and it was not a problem. So Deno, it feels welcoming so far. This is me running FFmpeg. I did have an idea about this actually during your talk, during the first talk, that the permission scheme on the command line for running processes is just Boolean. It's just you can allow something to run children process or not. I'd be interested to know, and this to tie back to Amazon again, if there's something like what Lambda does with layers, where there's some way of saying which things I can run. I don't know what it would look like, what it would end up being, but if I'm running FFmpeg, and I think this is a fairly common use case, especially FFmpeg, if there's some way to sandbox the run permission to just a well-known executable like FFmpeg. Just a stray thought. Anyhow, this is making our GIFs, so anyone who wants to make GIFs, you've learned something today. This is the highlight. This is the #1 highlight of this talk. We're right here. I'm so excited. This line of code was my favorite one to ever write this year. 2020 has been a mess so far. This line of code really turned it around. This is where I'm importing the computer player, the functions that operate my Sheshbesh game directly out of my GitHub, which is where the project was for students to learn from. I didn't have to do anything. I can use that code right away, web style, and I can automate running the computer against itself. So now we have Sheshbesh 0. And by 0, I don't mean it's a deep learning neural network. By 0, I mean it's going to win 0 games against a good player. But this is the output. This game actually, if you have the patience to go through it later, it's about a 4-minute GIF. Basically, James Bond wins it on the last roll. But you're all going to have to go through that later if you want to see it. So once I got through doing it myself, I got to the same place that Americans always get, that doing it yourself is not always the best choice. And this is kind of where the theme in this talk of, we really do want compatibility, because if I'm going to become a Deno developer, if I'm going to go into freelance contracts, writing something in Deno, if I'm going to pitch writing a microservice or a process or a solution of any sort in Deno to wherever I'm working, then I'm going to need to have the ability to rely on the crutches that I'm already relying on of Google and Stack Overflow, and frankly, all of the code base that exists in npm.js, which is great, but obviously has all the issues we know about. So the adapter, this is the model that Benji actually suggested as kind of the basis of the talk. The idea is, how hard would it be to get some module like Puppeteer to run in Deno. Now, Puppeteer is written in TypeScript, so theoretically, the actual source code wouldn't have too many issues if you wanted to go through it. My goal here was to do, as very well says, is be lazy. And I wanted to get it to run with the least amount of work possible, because that means most dollar per work. All right, so here's a little rundown of the existing Puppeteer libraries. Core took out this I'm going to do everything for you approach of Puppeteer, of downloading Chromium and dealing with everything. And web is a Browserify. So this is where we said we don't like require, and we're going to make something run in the browser, which is, it kind of has the same smell to Deno, where it says we're going to be, when we can, kind of browser-ish. And we're okay with that, even though it's a little funky. So we're going to write here, we're going to kind of skim through writing the adapter and see what it looks like. The first thing is getting the exports to work. So this is just a look at the top of the Browserify of a immediately invoked function that's running the code as if it's on the window scope. Here, all I had to do was make an export default and make sure there's a return value from this IFI. So now we could actually get the Puppeteer object when we import from this function. This is something that probably could be automated. One of my focuses when doing this adapter was, could this be a JS code shift? Could this be something that, at least for a bulk majority of publicly available NPM projects, could we automate at least most of the work, most of the time? You know, in case you wanted to fool all the people all the time, that's for a different day. So here's the WebSocket. This code looks really easy. It's, I think, maybe a testament to the API, the Connect WebSocket API, and just being able to use window event emitters and that type of work, that this WebSocket shim reads really easy. It was somewhat of a hassle for me going through the Puppeteer web Browserify. It's just TypeScript kind of compiled down to JavaScript. Going through that code and understanding how it was using this object, this class, is written kind of as a reflection of how the rest of the code base was using it. So I'm not entirely certain this part of the process, outside of the specific use case of WebSockets or some other widely used API, I don't know if this process would be automatable, if there's some wider API, some other, you know, less obvious APIs that exist out of Node or out of the browser that are being used in some module. Again, Deno.writeFile is just, it makes me happy. I was on a project earlier this year that used FS and FS Extend or FS Extra, and it was just a mess everywhere. So this, having it file system ops in a standard library, thank you. This slide is just about, I just wanted to complain a little bit, let you feel my pain. The Chrome Dev protocol and Puppeteer have versioning issues. So everywhere, for instance, this Mac, this is my Chalat machine. So Mr. Dahl, we can teach you one Hebrew word from the age of Corona. The word is Chalat. It's an acronym, and I never learn acronyms. I can't figure them out half the time. But Chalat is Chofesh Lo Teshlum, that you have freedom, but no money. So Corona caused me Chalat, but I still have my Chalat machine, but I can't run this demo on this machine because the version of Chrome here and the version of Puppeteer aren't matched up. And I only started trying to solve that problem 7 minutes before my talk. This was my big proof of concept that Puppeteer was actually running, that I had actually finished adapting it by and large to work in Deno. This was code that I pulled out of Stack Overflow. It's a solution to clipping a screenshot to an element on a page for a selector. This was written just for original Puppeteer. I copy pasted it. It worked out of the box when I ran it in Deno. So that's going to bring me to one of my conclusions, which is that Deno as a project brings the isomorphism of JavaScript as a priority. I think that's a huge positive. Maybe I should read the chat. There's a whole bunch in there. Okay, so we got it running in Puppeteer. The code is all available on my GitHub. Sorry, we're not going to run any demos on this machine because, you know, Steve Jobs' ghost apparently doesn't want it to work. And I just want to give a report about what I managed to accomplish in Deno, going through and trying to make an adapter and running around. We managed to deal with the processes. That was great and easy. We managed to get the Puppeteer API working. I don't have coverage for it, so I can't tell you that, you know, if you want to open another browser window and, you know, have a Chrome extension in it and see if that communicates with something, I don't know if that's going to work. I didn't go that deep. We did prove the concept of the adapter. So it's a mixed bag on the adapter. There's some things that can be automated. There's some things that just off the top of my head, it didn't, like it smells NP to try to figure out how to get the JavaScript that's coming out of a node module to backwards compatibilize itself to different standard library APIs. I think some of them, yes, some of them, no. And the important thing is that my Shesh computer player is still terrible. I taught one kid how to, one of the students actually who programmed the game learned how to play Shesh by playing against it, but very soon after he was able to beat it. So these are my conclusions. So the URL imports is just, it's fantastic. Thank you. That's another sandwich. They're great. It makes me wonder what we were doing for years and years and years with Webpack. TypeScript, I think, is good for the industry more than it is for any specific developer. I like examples in my docs. Maybe that's something that I can try to contribute to the project. The browser-like runtime is basically, it's a backdoor for these adapters to work. I think it's great. And I think a lot of people will not like it because it would be like an Akira of NPM code coming into Deno. And yeah, I think Deno could be, it could help people get into JavaScript who wouldn't have otherwise thought it was, you know, strong enough a language, that it was grown up enough. You know, people who work at Google who, you know, have this attitude like, oh, JavaScript, oh, I do that when I'm, you know, drinking at the end of the week. I think we should outgrow that. So the code, here's the link. You can use it if you want. And I wanted to send out some thanks. I really want to encourage people, if you're showing up to this meetup, you're 90 people who are on the cutting edge, you're interested, you're forward thinking, you're really pushing for things to work in the world. Smoking is just something I'm taking on today. Take something on politically. You know, if you want to make a bike path in your village, do it. If you want to overhaul the entire education system of your country, do it. That's my big plan. Because we're the best.